The Senate will come to order. The chaplain will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God of our salvation, in spite of the challenges of today and tomorrow, we continue to look to you, our help in ages past and our hope for the seasons to come. Deliver us from the pitfalls of political brinksmanship. May our lawmakers continually remember how you have led this nation in the past, finding inspiration and faith that you will also guide this land in the days to come. Give our senators strength, power, and wisdom for these grand and exacting times. Use them to defend our liberties and to unify our nation for the good of humanity. We pray in your mighty name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 22, 2018. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable John Bozeman, a senator from the state of Arkansas, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Orrin G. Hatch, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
I have on a red sweater this morning in the hopes that Christmas is not too far away for all of us, including the members of Congress. With that in mind, let me give everyone an update on where we are. Yesterday, the Democratic leader and I reached a procedural agreement to create space for ongoing negotiations over government funding. To provide flexibility as the White House and Senate Democrats continue their discussions, the Senate will officially proceed to the House-passed, the Senate already officially proceeded to the House-passed funding legislation, so that's pending. But we did so with an understanding that no further votes will occur until the President and Senate Democrats have reached an agreement to resolve this. Let me say that again. We pushed the pause button until the President, from whom we will need a signature, and Senate Democrats, from whom we will need votes, reach an agreement. No procedural votes, no test votes, just a meaningful vote on a bipartisan agreement whenever that is reached. And it's my hope that it's reached sooner rather than later. It is no mystery why securing our nation's borders is such a major priority for Republicans here in the Senate and Republicans over in the House and for President Trump. Any look at the plain facts leads to one simple conclusion. The crisis of security at our southern border is real. Over the past year, Customs and Border Protection's records of apprehensions and interdictions at our southern border are literally, Mr. President, staggering. 800 known gang members, a 50% increase over last year. Nearly 7,000 individuals with criminal histories, including weapons trafficking and violent offenses. more than double the levels of fentanyl, along with other illicit substances. So the report card is quite clear. America's borders are in crisis. These facts I've stated are not partisan facts. They aren't ideological. They're just facts. Just facts. They don't describe the Republican Party's version of events or the president's version of events. They describe reality. So one would think that securing our homeland, controlling our borders, and protecting the American people would be bipartisan priorities. Uncontroversial, common sense, bipartisan priorities, a core duty of any nation's government. And here's the interesting thing. Until very, very recently, Mr. President, that seemed to be the case. Back in 2006, Democrats were perfectly happy to support hundreds of miles of physical barriers along the border. 26 Democrats voted for the bill, including then Senator Obama, then Senator Clinton, and my good friend, the current Democratic leader from New York. But what about more recently? Earlier this year, Mr. President, the Democratic leader offered $25 billion for physical barriers in his negotiations with the president. 5 times as much as the White House is reasonably requesting right now. And that was just earlier this year. Republicans in the House and in the Senate believe the House's provision for $5 billion in border funding plus additional disaster funding was completely reasonable. I was glad to vote to advance that legislation yesterday. My colleagues and I are proud to stand with the American people on this subject for the safety of American families and the health and security of our communities. But this time, Democrats have rejected that reasonable request. They've refused to meet President Trump halfway and provide even one-fifth of the resources for the border they were willing to provide just a few months ago. Just a few months ago. There's no bright line of principle that separates hundreds of miles of physical barriers in 2006 from new physical barriers in 2018. There is no major philosophical shift that made $25 billion for border security worthwhile just a few months ago, but makes a far more modest investment of $5 billion immoral, and unacceptable today? No, Democrats haven't rejected the president's request and invited this partial government shutdown because of some principled objection that they just discovered in the last few weeks. It's not some principled discovery they've just made in the last few weeks. They brought this about because they're under a lot of pressure. We all know this, from their far left, and feel compelled to disagree with the president on almost anything, and certainly this. So that's where we are. But we don't need to be here for long. In order to get us out of this mess, a negotiated solution will need to check these boxes. It's really simple, Mr. President, really simple. It will need the support of 60 senators, which will obviously include a number of Democrats. It will need to pass the House, and it will need a presidential signature. That's how we make a law in this situation. 60 votes in the Senate, majority in the House, and President Trump's signature. That's what's needed. That's what will end this regrettable episode. Reopen the lapsed portions of the federal government and produce the investment in border security that our nation really needs. So I'm glad that productive discussions are continuing at this hour between my friend, the Democratic leader in the House, and the White House. When those negotiations produce a solution that is acceptable to all of those parties, it will receive a vote here on the Senate floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the House message to accompany H.R. 695, which the clerk will report.
House message to accompany H.R. 695, an act to amend the National Child Protection Act of 1993, and so forth, and for other purposes.
I suggest that no quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir.
And to the whole
likewise.
staff. I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, at midnight last night, roughly 25% of the government shut down because of one person and one person alone, President Trump. We arrived at this moment because President Trump has been on a destructive 2-week temper tantrum, demanding the American taxpayer pony up for an expensive and ineffective border wall that the President promised Mexico would pay for. Make no mistake, the Trump shutdown is not about border security. All of the proposals we've made contain over $1 billion in new border security money, the same amount allocated last year by both parties, and even the President agreed to. And the Trump administration has barely even spent any of the border security money from last year. So the Trump shutdown isn't over border security. It's because President Trump is demanding billions of dollars for an expensive, ineffective wall that the majority of Americans don't support. Let me remind you, the President called for a shutdown no less than 25 times. He's wanted one for months. In our meeting in the Oval Office, President Trump said he would be proud to shut the government down. Imagine saying he'd be proud to shut the government down. Even Rush Limbaugh, one of the biggest supporters of the President, said it was a Trump shutdown, that he caused it. He said, quote, this is Limbaugh speaking, "The President wants you to know it's money for the wall or nothing. And if it's nothing, he shuts it down." Just 2 days ago, the Senate unanimously agreed to a proposal by Leader McConnell to keep the government open through February. It wasn't exactly what Democrats wanted. We thought it should be longer. But we agreed because we wanted to keep the government open. And all indications were that the President would sign the bill. But President Trump, beholden to the far, far right, unwilling to shoulder even the slightest critique from Rush Limbaugh or Laura Ingraham, changed his mind on the bipartisan Senate bill, passed unanimously by all Republicans and all Democrats in this chamber, and he sent his House allies off to tilt at windmills. Everyone knew yesterday, long before the House vote, that the President's wall lacked 60 votes in the Senate. It is proven to lack even 50 votes. It will never pass the Senate, not today, not next week, not next year. So, Mr. President, President Trump, if you want to open the government, you must abandon the wall, plain and simple. The Senate's not interested in swindling American taxpayers for an unnecessary, ineffective, and wasteful policy. What we do support, Democrats and Republicans, is real, effective border security, but not a wall. The wall is President Trump's bone to the hard right people. It's no way to spend $5 billion for political bone. I've heard the President and his allies in the media say Democrats don't support border security. Nothing could be further from the truth. Democrats have always been for smart and effective ways to secure our border. We're pushing for technology like drones and sensors and inspection equipment. Every single proposal we made to the President included $1.3 billion for border security. The Trump shutdown provides $0 for border security. I have never supported a border wall, and I challenge anyone on the hard right to find a time when I or any expert has supported a wall like what the President has proposed. So, where do we go from here? Well, 3 proposals are on the table. 2 by Democrats, Leader Pelosi and I. 1 by Leader McConnell, each of which would reopen the government and provide $1.3 billion in border security. We're also open to discussing any proposals with the President, as long as they don't include funding for the wall. But in order for an agreement to be reached, all 4 congressional leaders must sign off, and the President must endorse it and say that he will sign it. Leader McConnell must agree. Speaker Ryan must agree. They cannot duck responsibility. Leader McConnell still controls this chamber. Speaker Ryan controls what reaches the floor of the House. They are essential to this process. Leader McConnell can't duck out of it. He knows that. Of course, Leader Pelosi and I must agree. And most importantly, the President must publicly support and say he'll sign an agreement before it gets a vote in either chamber. We don't want to go through what we went through a few days ago. Both Leader McConnell and I have agreed that qualification for a specific reason. Repeatedly, the President has privately agreed to a deal with congressional leaders only to reverse himself when criticized by the far right. We can't have another situation when the President signals support at first, but then reverses himself, which is precisely what caused this shutdown in the first place. If Leader McConnell, Speaker Ryan, Leader Pelosi, and I agree on a solution, and the President says he'll sign it, we can end the Trump shutdown immediately. Discussions continue among the members of our staffs. The Republican leader and I will update the Senate on the status of those talks once progress has been made. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, while I realize the chair cannot respond, it is good to see my good friend in the chair. Normally on a Saturday, we'd see each other in the Senate gym, not on the Senate floor. Let me think for a moment which place we would rather be. I think I know. But in seriousness, Mr. President, today 9 of our 15 federal departments and several dozen agencies have shuttered their doors. By doing that, they've denied vital services to millions of American citizens. Since midnight last night, just a few days before Christmas, more than 800,000 dedicated public servants and their families have been told not to expect their next paycheck for the foreseeable future. And there is one reason only, that our federal government has shut down today and countless Americans are living with uncertainty. That reason is President Donald J. Trump. The president is holding the federal government hostage for $5 billion of American taxpayer dollars for his unnecessary, ineffective, and expensive wall on the southern border. A wall, incidentally, he repeatedly promised, gave his word to the American taxpayers that Mexico would pay for. Now he wants American taxpayers to dig in their pockets and pay for it. You know, the president's irresponsible behavior is astounding. His job, like ours, is to keep the federal government operating for the hundreds of millions of Americans who depend on government services every day, from our national parks to housing services for the elderly, the disabled, our veterans, for assistance for our nation's farmers. In fact, 2 days ago, the President signed the Farm Bill and praised his efforts. Today, he's precipitated a shutdown that shuttered the doors to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's field offices, the same offices that farmers are going to have to go to understand this new law. But the worst part of all that is this was completely avoidable. We provided the president with several options to avoid this result. It's a case where he can't take yes for an answer. We offered to pass 6 full-year appropriations bills and a continuing resolution for Homeland, or a continuing resolution for all the remaining bills. Either of these options would have kept the government open. They would have provided more than $1 billion for border security, the very thing the president says he needs and cares most about. Plus the fact, signing them instead of having a needless shutdown would save taxpayers millions, even billions of dollars. But after rejecting both of these offers, the Senate passed by voice vote a 7-week continuing resolution. This would give us more time to negotiate and avert this catastrophe. Democrats and Republicans came together to pass it. The president had agreed to sign it. We finally had a path forward. But then Fox News and the right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh started criticizing. The president's ego won out over his duties to the country. His ego was so bruised, he reversed courses. He went back on what he had agreed to. And here we are, exactly where the president wanted to be, in the middle of a Trump shutdown. And for anyone doubting where responsibility lies, let's recall that the president has publicly called for a government shutdown. How many times over the past year? No fewer than 25 times. Just last week, he declared he'd be proud to shut down the government unless we capitulate to his demands. Proud? I've been here with every president, Republican and Democrat, since President Gerald Ford. It's one of the most reckless statements I've ever heard uttered by a president of the United States. And now he has made good on his threat. His pride has won out, and the Trump shutdown has begun. How long is it going to last? Who knows? Yesterday, the president promised us it'd last a long time. And then he promised us it'd be a short shutdown. Even in this, his behavior is erratic. So how did we get here? Is there a legitimate crisis precipitating the shutdown? Is the president playing games with the lives and livelihoods of American citizens to solve some immediate problem that threatens our nation? No, of course not. In caving to the most extreme sliver of his base, President Trump is throwing what many have described as a childish tantrum because he wants money to fulfill a cynical promise he made repeatedly on the campaign trail. More of a symbolic prize than a sensible policy solution. This wasteful wall, a wall, incidentally, he promised Mexico would pay for, not the American taxpayers. This wasteful wall that he now wants to build to the American taxpayers would do more to preserve the president's ego than would to protect the American people. But I believe it's the natural result of the president's years-long demonization and vilification of immigrants. Years during which the president rallied his base with falsehoods, fantasies, where vulnerable women and children are portrayed as hordes of gang members and terrorists invading our country. The sad reality, as all of us Republicans and Democrats know, many of these people coming to our country are fleeing desperate situations in their home countries. They're looking for sanctuary. They aren't coming here to perpetuate violence, they're running from it. So let me be clear. There is no crisis that requires us to build a 30-foot wall between us and our neighbors to the south. The president's hateful rhetoric about a crisis on our southern border does not reflect reality. At the end of 2017, arrests of people attempting to enter the U.S. illegally dropped to historic lows. Between 2000 and 2018, border apprehensions fell sharply from 1.6 million in fiscal year 2000 to approximately 400,000 in fiscal year 2018. That's a 75% drop. Not only do the facts on the ground not warrant spending billions of American taxpayer dollars on a big, beautiful wall, as the president likes to call it, it's not who we are as nations. We are a country founded by immigrants. Just as my maternal grandparents came to Vermont from Italy, my paternal great-great-grandparents came to Vermont from Ireland, or my wife's parents came to Vermont from the province of Quebec in Canada. We even look at our immigrant founding of this country. Then if we want to wall ourselves off from our neighbors, it's not only an expensive waste of American taxpayers' dollars, it's immoral, it's ineffective, it's an affront to everything this country is supposed to stand for. To build the wall, the president wants to seize land from ranchers and farmers in Texas and other border states seize lands from farmers and ranchers and land that's been in their family for generations. He would need to construct walls through wildlife refuges and nature preserves, basically destroying them. And ironically, we'd end up walling ourselves off in the Rio Grande in the process, essentially ceding the river to Mexico. And after all that, and after billions of wasted taxpayer dollars, what would it accomplish? Would it stop people from fleeing violence in their home countries and seeking sanctuary? No. Would it stop drug smugglers and human traffickers from engaging in illegal activity? Definitely no. You know, as so many have said, show me a 30-foot wall, I'll show you a 31-foot ladder or a tunnel. To address these complex issues, we need real solutions, not bumper sticker slogans, not angry tweets. Now, everyone agrees that we need to keep our border safe and secure. But it's got to be smart border security that works. New technology is proven to work on the border and our ports of entry. New air and marine assets, additional personnel were needed. A 30-foot wall is symbolic and unneeded. And even if we needed to build it, what is the rush? Over the past 2 years, Congress has provided nearly $1.7 billion to build or replace fencing on the southern border. But the administration has hardly spent any of that money, and the projects it's undertaken have been handled in such a way they've ballooned in cost. So we gave them the $1.7 billion, demanding now more. How much of the $1.7 billion did he spend? 6%. 6% of these funds have been spent. We've recently learned that one project in the Rio Grande Valley that was supposed to cost $445 million will now cost the American taxpayers nearly $787 million. 77% cost overrun, a price tag, $31.5 billion each and every mile. So it seems to me you can't really trust the administration to be responsible with the money we've already provided, let alone trust it to spend responsibly the additional money the President is demanding. Let's put an end to this nonsense once and for all. We have an easy way of doing it. We could finish 6 of the 7 appropriations bills right now while we continue to debate these other issues. These bills are the product of bipartisan compromise where Republicans and Democrats came together. They provide billions of dollars in new resources to address critical needs of the American people. They protect U.S. national security. These 6 bills that we've already agreed on, Republicans and Democrats, would provide much-needed funding to help combat our nation's opioid epidemic and critical investments in infrastructure, help us rebuild our nation's crumbling roads, bridges, and highways. They provide resources to protect the environment, to help ensure the water we drink, the air we breathe, is safe and clean for this generation, for our children, and for the next. And they support key allies in national security programs that enable the United States to be a global leader, a role that's being increasingly challenged by China and Russia. So I have to ask, is the President really going to hold the American people hostage over a wall that he, time and time again, promised Mexico would pay for? Is he really going to force hundreds of thousands of federal employees, including the very agency he depends upon to carry out his immigration enforcement policies, to work without pay over the Christmas holiday? Is he really going to tell millions of Americans, including his most ardent supporters. He could care less whether they're cut off from critical government services, purely in service of his own vanity. You know, the president has apparently decided that fighting a symbolic fight for a shiny object is more important than keeping our government running for the American people. It's the height of irresponsibility. Negotiations with Chairman Shelby and Leader McConnell continue in good faith. I am here this weekend to continue and have talked with members of both parties. But we all come to the same conclusion. We can agree easily, Republicans and Democrats. But we can only succeed if the president decides to do what we've done, and that is put the country first. The President of the United States, he owes that to the American people. He owes reality, not rhetoric. Mr. President, do not see another member seeking recognition on a different subject. I will speak further about this, and I would ask consent that the editorial in yesterday's New York Times about General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, be placed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, like so many people, Republicans and Democrats, I was stunned to hear that Secretary Mattis was going to be leaving. But I understand his reasons. He has said that he has always felt a duty to uphold the interests of the United States, the security of the United States, to uphold our agreements with other countries for the security of democracy. He felt, in effect, the president disagreed with him on that, felt otherwise, so the president should be entitled to have somebody who takes differing views. Unfortunately, the views of General Mattis were views that were a result of decades of service to this country. As a Marine in combat, a Marine as commanding, a four-star general, one who had the strong, strong respect of Republicans and Democrats alike. Certainly the strong respect of those who have served in the military and know what it means to actually stand up for this country, not just in rhetoric, but by putting their lives on the line on the battlefield. I've always admired General Mattis. I applaud his service to the United States of America. And I know he is a man that can leave with his head held high. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. You're still here. Oh, okay. Apparently you were right. Uh-huh.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arkansas.
I ask that the quorum call be received.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Agricultural Committee be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 5636.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 5636, an act to designate additions to the Flatside Wilderness on the Wichita National Forest and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
If there's no further debate, questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the H.R. 6602.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 6602, an act to reauthorize the New Jersey Coastal Heritage Trail route and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
If there's no further debate, the question is on the passage of the bill. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
With that, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Georgia is recognized.
I'd ask that the quorum call be officiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, here we are at approximately 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon, trying to do the people's business in a situation that nobody wanted, and yet because I believe of political self-interest, we are in a situation right now where we are in what I would call a crisis mode of operation. We need to get a deal done. But I want to address a couple of topics today that are at issue here as we debate the funding issue, which is at the crux of why we're here today and this weekend. Our country was built on immigration. There's just no question about that. We are all direct derivatives in one way or the other. But I'd like to be very clear. Most of the people that are here in this country over the last 2 centuries came in legally. Today, we bring in 1.1 million people a year legally Mr. President. We bring in about 70,000 people who have a job-related way to get into our system. There are about 70,000 direct family members. That's the spouse and immediate children. There are another 300,000 refugees and asylum seekers, Mr. President. There is a rational reason that we should do that, and we've been doing that. Today, every day, asylum seekers and refugees are permitted into our country. But, Mr. President, there's another 800,000 that come in legally every year that the only reason they come in is because they have an indirect family link through generations to the 70,000 that come in and work. Given that environment, Mr. President, we also have a temporary work permit system here that, again, has over 1 million people in it every year. Our country is the most welcoming, philanthropic country in the history of the world, Mr. President, and to think that just protecting our borders as a national security issue is somehow hard-hearted and radical. No country in the history of the world has ever demonstrated that it was a radical thought to maintain and protect the sovereignty of their own country and their own borders. Indeed, Mr. President, there were only 6 reasons why 13 colonies came together in the first place in the late 18th century and formed the United States of America. The number one reason articulated is to provide for the common defense of our country. President Trump is leading right now in his first responsibility, and that is to protect every citizen of the United States of America. He's fighting for the American people. Actually, that's how he got elected, Mr. President. He got elected because he complained about the dysfunction in Washington, about politicians, bureaucrats, and the media. And Mr. President, so did I in 2014, 2 years before President Trump did. I believe that people are fed up with this dysfunction in Washington. But I want to reemphasize that what is at issue here is the protection of our sovereignty as a country, not to change the immigration laws. That's not what is at debate today. I want to remind everybody that just in this body, this year, 43 of my colleagues across the aisle, 43 in an immigration bill proposed by Susan Collins on this side, 43 Democrats voted for a $25 billion border security package, Mr. President. 43. I think President Trump has demonstrated tremendous negotiating willingness over and over this past year on this issue. But let's be clear what's going on. The flow of drugs and human trafficking at our border is completely unacceptable. Everybody in this body agrees with that, demonstrated by the fact that 43 Democrats actually voted for a $25 billion border security package earlier this year. There's no way you can avoid admitting that. This has to stop. The undampened flow of illegal drugs has created a crisis in our country. The fact that we sit here and are more concerned about the political realities in Washington than we are stopping human trafficking across our southern border is totally unacceptable, Mr. President. An open border goes against the very ideas of why our country was founded. It totally undercuts American sovereignty. The American people know that, and they're fed up with the status quo. And I can tell you firsthand, so is President Donald Trump. The Dems are very clear. My colleagues have demonstrated they prefer open borders, illegal drug transfers, and human trafficking to a common sense protection of our southern border. We know fences work. I've been to countries around the world where they're protecting their borders with simple fences where they need them. And we have a multiple approach to defending our southern border. We have many miles right now that already have similar fences up that deter illegal crossage. At the same time, this president has shown over and over again that he's workable with our colleagues across the aisle to find some common solution here that we can all live with. He's ready to make a deal today. In fact, right as we speak, Vice President, the President, and the Chief of Staff are in the White House right now. The leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate is right now negotiating. This needs to get done, Mr. President. There's no reason. I've done dozens of these in my career, and there's no reason, looking at what is important to both parties, there's no reason this can't get done. I believe the President's ready to make a deal and fully fund the federal government, the last 25%. And let's remember how we got here. This body, the Senate and the House, this year did something it hadn't done in 22 years, and that is fund at least 75% of our federal government on time. That was by September 30th. We are here at the end of the first quarter of our next fiscal year, still trying to fund the last 25% because of this controversy over the border wall. First number was $25 billion, as I said, that was agreed to by the other side. Then there was another $5 billion offered up. Lastly, the President, I thought, had a deal early this week with our colleagues across the aisle for $1.6 billion. That deal was taken away. We're right now, I think, experiencing the second Schumer shutdown of this year. First was over the DACA controversy. President Trump took the Democratic request for 600,000 work permits for an indefinite period of time and changed that and made an offer of 1.8 million DACA recipients for a pathway to citizenship. He took a chance with the ultra-right in our party, the conservative party, part of the party. He took a chance and stood up and said, this is the right thing to do if it's paired with the right deal on the other side. I believe that there's no reason why we can't get this package done right now. I think the President agrees with that. I think the Democratic leader agrees with that. But prior to yesterday, for a few days, there was no one talking. I give Mick Mulvaney and the Vice President a lot of credit yesterday. I know that the Vice President was in this building until about 9:30 last night negotiating this. I just believe that it's time to get this done. Nancy Pelosi in the House repeatedly said that President Trump couldn't get the votes from the House to pass a funding package that included these border security priorities. Well, we now know she was wrong. The votes were there. The House has sent a bill back over here that has not only border security, but relief package, a serious relief package for hurricane victims, disaster relief victims, and the wildfire victims in California. The U.S. Senate should have included President Trump's priorities from the very beginning. Now this body has a chance to do the right thing. It's time to get this done, Mr. President. We're here. Let's get a deal, bring it back in here, pass it, get it back to the House, and let's stop this nonsense. Let's not yield to political self-interest on either side, Mr. President. I implore all of us who have influence with the people who are negotiating this to let's get beyond this. This is so close. There's no reason that we're sitting here letting America be nervous about whether we're going to get this done. This should have been done back in September, Mr. President, as I said earlier. Now let's focus on our national interests, the things we're all called to do in our oath of office. Protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Let's fully fund this government, the last 25%, move past this, secure our border, and provide disaster relief for the people who are in a timely need right now for us to do that. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to executive session for the consideration of calendar 1204, 1206 through 1215, and 1228 through 1232. If the nominations be confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that any statements related to the nominations be printed in the record, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Commerce Committee be discharged at further consideration, and the Senate proceed to the en bloc consideration of PNs 2507, 2626, 2638, 2639, 2670, 2671. That the nominations be confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that any statements related to the nominations be printed in the record, the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak their interrupt for 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask the Chair to lay before the Senate the message to accompany S 3661.
The Chair lays before the Senate the following message from the House.
Resolved that the bill from the Senate S 3661 entitled An Act to Provide for a Program of the Department of Defense to commemorate the 75th anniversary of World War II do pass with an amendment.
I move to concur in the House amendment and ask unanimous consent that the motion be agreed to, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 7319, which was received from the House.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 7319, an act to amend the Federal Assets Sale and Transfer Act of 2016 and so forth, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 7318, which was received from the House.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 7318, an act to amend the Federal Assets Sale and Transfer Act of 2016 and so forth, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 4689, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 4689, an act to authorize early repayment of obligations to the Bureau of Reclamation and so forth.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask consent the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 663, H.R. 1967.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 663, H.R. 1967, an act to amend the Reclamation Project Act of 1939 and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask consent the committee reported amendment be agreed to, that the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 4203, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 4203, an act to amend Title 18, United States Code with regard to stalking.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that Toomey, a substitute amendment at the desk, be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed. And the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 7279, which was received from the House.
Clerk will report.
H.R. 7279, an act to amend the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, and so forth, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know no further debate on the bill.
If there's no further debate, the question is on passage of the bill. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of SRS 742 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 742, designating the first week of December 2018 and supporting the designation of each first week of December thereafter as Cancer Screen Week, and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of SRS 743 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 743, congratulating the International Association of Firefighters on the 100th anniversary of its founding.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of SRS 285 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 285, honoring the life and achievements of Dr. Samuel Dubois Cook.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening
Without objection.
Action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H-Con Res 149, which was received from the House and is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
House Concurrent Resolution 149, directing the Clerk of the House of Representatives to make certain corrections in the enrollment of H.R. 4174.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask the concurrent resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of S573 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S573, a bill to establish the National Criminal Justice Commission.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I further ask consent the amendment at the desk be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Foreign Relations be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 4969 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 4969, an act to improve the design and construction of diplomatic posts and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the Corker substitute amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Foreign Relations be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 672 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 672, an act to require continued and enhanced annual reporting to Congress in the annual report on international religious freedom, on anti-Semitic incidents in Europe, and so forth, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session and the Commerce Committee be discharged of further consideration, and the Senate proceed to the en bloc consideration of PNs 2705 and 2706, that the nominations be confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that any statements related to the nominations be printed in the record, the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, here's where we are. The Senate will next meet for a pro forma session on Monday. That's the 24th. The next scheduled session will be on the 27th of December. As I said earlier today when we opened, I'm glad that productive discussions are continuing. When these negotiations produce a solution that is acceptable to all parties, which means 60 votes in the Senate, a majority in the House, and a presidential signature. At that point, we will take it up on the Senate floor. Senators will be notified when a vote is scheduled, and in the meantime, the discussions and negotiations continue. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn to then convene for a pro forma session on Monday, December 24th at 11 a.m. I further ask that when the Senate adjourns on Monday, December the 24th, it next convene at 4 p.m. Thursday, December 27th, and that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and morning business be closed. Finally, following leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of the House message to accompany under the previous order. I'm going to repeat the final sentence before asking for consent. Finally, following leader remarks, the Senate resumed consideration of the House message to accompany H.R. 695 under the previous order.
Without objection.
So if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask it stand adjourned under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 11 a.m. on Monday,